Morning students, welcome to our today's session. In our previous session, we had seen the first two approaches to the capital structure, that is net income approach and net operating income approach, right? So in our today's session, we'll see the remaining two. That is the third is your traditional approach. So what is a traditional approach and how, what are the propositions, what it actually tells us, right? Basically, you need to understand one thing. Traditional approach is very much similar to your net operating income approach. I'll tell you why. We'll start with the PPT. We'll start with this slide. You'll understand why I say that it is similar to net operating income approach. First, we'll try to understand these points. First one, the cost of debt. These are the things what your traditional approach preaches. This is what it actually tells you, right? These are the derivations or the outcomes what we have received from the inventors of traditional approach, right? There might be certain people who would have studied in depth and they would have created something for something like a traditional approach, and it actually tells you how exactly these capital structure theories work, right? So, what are they trying to tell us? First thing is that the cost of debt remains more or less constant up to a certain level of leverage, but raises thereafter at an increasing rate. So, let's try to understand this. We now know what is meant by leverage. Leverage is like adding a component of debt or loan to your business, right? To your capital structure, basically. The cost of debt, it remains same up to some extent, right? For example, if cost of debt of your firm is say 6%, it remains same. So initially you had only owner's capital, that is you started off with 1 lakh rupees of share capital. Now you're increasing debt component. It was 100% of equity. Now you are trying to change the capital structure of your firm. So you start purchasing 10,000 rupees of debt from the market. So you will be paying, say, assume the cost of debt is 5%. So you will be paying 5% of 10,000, correct? After some time, you again change your capital structure. Maybe you bring in 30% of debt and 70% of equity. So when you're increasing this leverage of debt in your business, right? When you're increasing the debt component in your capital structure, as and when it goes up, the amount of debt in your capital structure goes up, the cost of debt will tend to remain constant up to certain level, maybe 40%, 50%, 60%, depending on the shareholder's perspective, right? So after that level, it raises, aggressive. There'll be a there'll be a steep increase of the cost of debt. Why does this actually happen? This happens because there is something called as cost of default. What is meant by cost of default or cost of bankruptcy? It means that when you're procuring debt beyond certain level, the firm might not have the capacity to pay back its interest. For example, if you are having 10 lakh rupees of capital in your firm, out of which you have borrowed 9 lakh 50,000 from outsiders. So whether you make profit or you don't make profit, you are supposed to pay interest for this 9 lakh 50,000, correct? Because it is debt and not equity capital. Equity capital, you can tell, boss, I have made a loss, I'll not be paying you your dividends this year. If you incur loss, you don't have to pay anything to your equity shareholders. But the same will not apply to your debt. For debt holders, whether you make profit, you don't make profit, you are supposed to pay interest. Even if the cash flow is not there at the outset, but still this interest, whatever you are supposed to pay, will get accumulated as arrears for, arrears until you pay them back, correct? For this 9,50,000, you are supposed to pay interest, you are not able to pay interest because there is no profit in your firm right now. So after 1 year, again same situation, you are not able to pay interest. But this interest of 9,50,000, assuming 10% interest rate, which comes up to 95,000 rupees, this 95,000 rupees gets accumulated every single year. On this 9,50,000, you are supposed to pay interest because you are postponing the settlement of your debtors. So, if this process continues for a period of 5 years or 10 years, your firm will be labeled as a sick firm. A sick firm is a firm which actually has or made or incurred losses for longer period of time, and you cannot actually recover out of this 10 lakhs of capital. Your capital itself was 10 lakhs, correct? You have actually, you did not pay interest for 10 years. So 95,000 per annum, 10 years it becomes 9,50,000. The double of your capital you are supposed to pay, correct? You had initially procured 10 lakh rupees, correct? Out of which 9,50,000 was belonging to debt. Now it has accumulated 9,50,000. You are supposed to pay 9,50,000 rupees of interest as well as 9,50,000 rupees of borrowed capital. So which becomes 19 lakh rupees end of 10 years. Correct? So this is what we call it as risk of bankruptcy. There is a component of risk of bankruptcy which actually, when you tend to borrow more amount of funds or borrowed funds from your market, what happens is that after a certain level, since this risk of default also increases, the cost of debt will tend to increase at an increasing rate. It improves at an aggressive rate. So what is the second point trying to tell us? The cost of equity capital remains more or less constant or raises only gradually up to certain level of leverage and raises sharply thereafter, similar to your cost of debt. So why does equity capital, the cost of equity capital increase? This is because after that certain threshold, what we are discussing with respect to your debt, after that certain level, your equity shareholders will also tend to expect more. They charge you more because the whatever profit you are earning, since there is too much of debt, your the entire profits is going to pay the interest back. There is very less chance of paying your equity share capital, dividends to your equity share capital. So the risk of equity shareholders will also be very huge. So you are supposed to, the expectations of this equity shareholders will also increase. So let's conclude. The average cost of capital as a consequence of the above behavior of cost of debt and cost of equity decreases up to certain point. Up to this threshold point, maybe 40% of debt or 50% of debt in your capital structure, it tends to decrease. After that point, after that certain point, it tends to increase in a higher rate. So that's what is your second point, I guess. Remains more or less unchanged for moderate increases in leverage, thereafter raises beyond a certain point. After that threshold point of maybe 40% of debt or 50% of debt, it increases aggressively. The overall cost of capital also increases aggressively, which will not have any positive benefit for your firm. So this is about your traditional approach. Whenever you are writing about traditional approach, please write a graph. I have not put in the graph here in this PPT. Anyhow, with the PPT which I'll be sharing with you all, I'll put a graph Please write the graph, explain all these procedures, and mention these three propositions. I mean, for a question on traditional approach, you need to mention all these 3 points and write the graph. All these 4 theories of capital are very much important for your exams, right? Right. Next, let's jump on to the next approach, that is your final approach. Read all the assumptions. I'll give you 20 seconds of time. Right. So we'll start with Modigliani and Miller approach, approach, right? So all these while, from the time we started off with this chapter till the previous minute, there were 3 different propositions or 3 different approaches to your capital structure, correct? So which one to follow? Mr. Modigliani and Miller, they are 2 different people. They actually made a work, or they tried to have a, common view. Instead of having 3 different approaches, they wanted to bring in a common view, and that is the reason they started off with this study, right? From their study, they have given us something called as approach. So what does approach tell us? First, let's try to understand the assumptions. The assumptions are, the first assumption is that there is a perfect capital market. So what do you mean by perfect capital market? The information is freely available, right? Whatever information that is there in the company's this thing, it is freely available for everybody to access, right? And there is no problem of asymmetric information. What is asymmetric information? It means that, for example, Mr. X is a CFO of some corporation limited, right? There is one company and Mr. X is CFO of that particular company. So Mr. X will have access to certain confidential information. Based on this confidential information, if Mr. X starts trading, correct, he tend to make more profits, correct, because that information only he had access. He used this information for his personal benefit. This we call it as asymmetric information. And perfect capital market also means that the transactions are costless. You don't have something called as transaction cost. Also, there is nothing called as bankruptcy cost. Securities are indefinitely divisible. You don't have to say that there are 100 shares of 10 rupees each. Each share can be divisible up to 10 paisa, 1 paisa, 0.1 paisa, like that. The securities are indefinitely divisible. So this is what is meant by perfect capital market. First is that information is freely available. There is no problem of asymmetric information. Second is your transactions are costless. There is no transaction cost. Fourth is there is no bankruptcy cost. Last is securities are infinitely divisible. Right. This is about perfect capital market. Next is your rational investors and managers. What do you mean by rational investors and managers? Investors choose a combination of risk and return which is profitable for them. Correct? It's like very common thing. They tend to, investors tend to choose a combination of risk and return which is more feasible for them. And managers tend to act accordingly. Managers actually act in the interest of shareholders. That is the general assumption. Next, third point. Third assumption is that homogeneous expectations. Investors hold identical expectations about future operating return earnings. So what is meant by homogeneous expectation? It's like all the investors have similar interests and they have similar expectations from the firm. Equivalent risk class. Firms can be grouped into equivalent risk class based on their businesses. Each of the firm will have their own amount of risk. For example, tobacco industry or alcohol industry may tend to have a high risk, and something like your FMCG might have lesser risk, correct? So all the firms are operating under similar risk. Last is absence of tax, which means that there is no tax. So these are the assumptions of approach. Whenever you are writing about approach, start with the assumptions. Explain each of the assumptions. So under approach, we have two different propositions. What is the first proposition trying to tell us? The value of firm is equal to its operating income divided by the discount rate appropriate to its risk class. It is independent of its capital structure. Please note the last thing. It is independent of its capital structure. This is what your NOI approach tells you, correct? That is the reason I told you that your proposition 1 is similar to your NOI approach. Right. So value of firm is equal to the market value of debt plus market value of equity, or the operating income what we have gained divided by the discount. I mean, which is divided by the discount rate, which is appropriate to the risk class, right? So this is how you will be evaluating your value of the firm. This is your first proposition. There is something called as arbitrage argument. Before going to the example, let's try to understand what is arbitrage. Arbitrage refers to a process in which there is a shift of investor from one firm to another firm, or one market to another market, or anything like that. That's what we call it as arbitrage firm. So let's try to Google out. I don't know what your arbitrage argument tells you. Let's see what is the meaning of arbitrage. So arbitrage in economics and finance, arbitrage is the practice of taking advantage of a price difference between two or more markets. Okay, let me give you an example. There are two markets. One is National Stock Exchange, another is Bombay Stock Exchange. In Bombay Stock Exchange, the price of Yes Bank is trading at 15 rupees. In Bombay Stock Exchange, it is trading at 15 rupees, 1 5. Similarly, in National Stock Exchange, the same Yes Bank shares are trading at 15 rupees 25 paisa. Correct? So what you do is that you can purchase, you can, if you have shares in your Yes Bank, in National Stock Exchange, you can sell all the shares at 15 rupees 25 paisa and purchase the same quantity of shares at 15 rupees. So you will be saving 0.25 paisa for every share you have sold. Correct? So this act of making profits between jumping two firms or jumping between two different markets, we call it as arbitrage process. So, with respect to this arbitrage process, arbitrage argument, with respect to the proposition one of your approach, I have taken one simple example. You also in exams take one simple example like this and explain how the arbitrage argument works in approach. So, EBIT, I have taken a firm which is earning same amount of profits, right? EBIT 1 lakh 50, 1 lakh 50. Please note that firm A is unlevered firm. It doesn't have any debt in its capital structure. So I hope you guys are aware that it is better if we have levered firm, correct? We always emphasized on having debt in our capital structure. So this arbitrage argument tells you why it is not relevant to have debt in your business, right? It actually contradicts the other approaches to capital structure. Let's try to understand this. EBIT 1 lakh 50, 1 lakh 50 interest. So in firm A you have zero interest. In firm B you have 60,000 of interest, right? If you look at this market value of debt, it is 5 lakh. So 5 lakh into 12%, which comes up to 60,000. So EBIT interest you have taken 60,000. So equity earnings is 1 lakh 50,000, whereas equity earnings of firm B is 90,000. Cost of equity, if you calculate cost of equity, that is 90,000 divided by 10 lakh 62,000. It comes up to 16%. So you are earning, the cost of equity is 16% and cost of equity of firm A is 15%. Firm A it is 15%, firm B is firm B it is 16%. Why did this happen? Market value of equity is 10 lakhs and market value of equity is 5,62,500. So there is this difference is because of the inclusion of debt in your firm B, correct? Market value of debt is 0 because we don't have any debt. Market value of debt in firm B is 5 lakhs and market value of firm has also increased to 10 lakh 62,500 in case of firm B. Average cost of capital has also decreased from 15% to 14.12%, right? I think everything looks fine. Your cost of equity has increased, which means that you are paying more amount of dividends to your equity shareholders. Also, the average cost of capital has decreased, which is quite favorable. Also, along with all these things, the market value of firm has also increased from 10 lakhs to 10 lakh 62,500. Right? Everything is fine till now. Now, the actual game starts here. Please concentrate. Firm A is unlevered firm. It doesn't have debt component. Firm B has some amount of debt component. 5 lakhs of debt, 5 lakh 62,000 of equity. Now, let's start. Imagine there is a equity shareholder in firm B who is named X. Let's call him as X. Mr. X has 10% of equity stake in firm B, which means that his market value of equities, concentrate on this figure, 5 lakh 62,500 into 10%, which comes up to 56,250, correct? 56,250 rupees worth shares he has in firm B. Now, if I am a shareholder, what do? I don't care about all these proposals, everything. I simply want more benefits. So what I do is that I'll go to the market and borrow 50,000 rupees of debt. As an individual, I'll go to the market, purchase 50,000 rupees of debt at 12% interest. Why 12%? Because cost of debt is 12% here. Correct? Cost of debt is 12% in the market. I'll also purchase 50,000 rupees of debt at 12% rate of return, rate of interest. So what is my total money with me? I sold this 10% stake. I mean this 56,250 which I was having in firm B. I'll sell it. Now I have 56,250 rupees in cash in hand. I have also borrowed 50,000 rupees. The total amount I am having is 1,06,250. Correct? Adding these both 56 to 50 plus 50, 1,06,250 rupees I'm having. 1,06,250 rupees if I invest in firm B, correct? I'll be getting 15% dividend, correct? That is the cost of equity. 15% returns I'll get, correct? So 15% into 1,06,250 comes up to 15,937.5. Reduce this interest on 50,000 rupees. 50,000 rupees into your interest rate is 12%, which comes up to 6,000 rupees. So you have earned a sum of 15,937, out of which you pay 6,000 interest. End of the day, you have 9,937.5 rupees in your hand. If you compare this 9,937 with 9,000 which you are earning in firm B, you are earning 1,000 rupees extra, almost 1,000 rupees extra, correct? 937 rupees extra to be precise. So it is advisable for equity shareholders to actually, they tend to shift from a levered from to unlevered firm, which is very much contradictory to all the propositions we have studied. So this is your proposition 2. Just go through the slide for another 10 seconds. The expected return on equity is equal to the expected rate of return on assets plus a premium. The premium is equal to the debt equity ratio times the difference between expected returns on assets and the expected return on debt. Excuse me, ma'am. Yes. So proposition 2 states that the expected return on equity, the expectations of any equity shareholder is actually equal to expected rate of return on assets. For example, all the assets in your firm will be giving you certain rate of return, correct? For example, if I'm having a machinery will be giving me certain amount of returns because I would have invested in it. I would be processing raw materials out of it, and I'll be converting raw materials to finished goods. So that machinery will be giving me some amount of return. So the return on equity is actually equal to the expected rate of return on assets, that total sum of assets and its returns, that returns on all the the total sum of assets plus a certain premium. So the returns expected by equity is equal to the expected returns of assets plus a premium. So what exactly is meant by premium? Premium is equal to the debt equity ratio times the difference between expected return on assets and the expected return on debt. Let's not get confused. I know you wouldn't have understood the second sentence. Premium is nothing but, you can refer to this formula. Premium, this is our actual, this is our formula which we know. expected return on assets is equal to so here what would be the formula for calculating the return on assets? It would be proportion of debt into expected return on debt. The debt percentage will be there 5%. For example, if you have 25% of debt in your capital structure, which means that 0.25 into 5%, right? Plus proportion on proportion of equity. That is like if you have 0.75 of equity in your capital structure, if it is 75%, take it as 0.75 into expected return on equity. You can consider it to be 8%, 9%, 10% like that. So this is the formula which gives us return on assets. So deriving the same thing, correct? When I simplify that formula and take return of equity shareholders, you'll arrive at this formula. The same formula is there here. The premium is equal to the debt equity ratio times D by E is nothing but your debt equity ratio. The difference between expected return on assets and expected return on debt. Expected return on assets minus expected return on debt, correct? So this is your premium what they're actually talking about. So one let's try to understand the graph. This is pretty important. Propose Proposition 2 states that the lower level of debt, correct? If you look at this debt equity ratio left to this line, I'll explain you what this line is. Left to this line, this means that there is lesser debt equity ratio. The debt component in your capital structure is less comparatively, correct? This part will I mean the interest on debt here, we can call it as risk free debt, because it is very the debt in your capital structure is very minimal, that even if you are making minimal profit, you will be able to cover up that interest, correct? Even if you are say for example there is a crisis in your business, but you had taken only 10% of debt out of 9 lakh. Imagine your capital structure, I mean capital of your firm is 10 lakhs. Only 10% was your debt, which is about 1 lakhs, correct? Out of 10 lakhs, 1 lakh is your debt, 9 lakhs is your equity. You just and the interest payable is say some 10,000 rupees. Even if you make 15,000 rupees of profit for an investment of 10 lakhs, which is very very minimal and which is very unreasonable, even in those times you will be able to pay your debt, because the interest payable is very less. So the risk involved for these debt components or the debenture holders is very minimal, correct? No matter if the company makes very less amount of profits, you will be able to receive your interest. So that is the reason we can call it as risk free debt. After this certain point, it becomes risky debt. I mean in yeah, I mean in the in our initial stages of this session, we discussed how it becomes what are the ill effects of having more debt component in your business, correct? Similar to that, after a certain point, it becomes actually risky. So we'll try to understand this graph now. This point we can call it as optimal point, correct? This point we can call it as optimal point. But then after this point also, uh, the returns of equity will continue to increase. And if you look at this end point of this line, it is actually decreasing, correct? And your cost of debt will tend to increase sharply during this time. This is because of the same effect what we discussed, correct? So we'll assume that return of debt is independent, right? In this proposition, we assume that return on debt is independent. So initially there was a slight increase or almost straight line, correct? This is almost straight line. When it is risk-free debt, risk-free debt, that is in the, I mean, as and when you start increasing or you start introducing debt component to your capital structure, it is all pretty fine, correct? After some point of time, it tends to increase sharply. There is a steep increase of return of debt. This is because of something called as the bankruptcy cost or the cost of risk, correct? Since there is a huge amount of debt borrowing in the firm, the chances of default is also very high. So since they are taking more risk, the debt holders tend to ask for more returns also, correct? So this is the reason there is a steep curve here. So in with contrast to this return on debt, we'll consider the return on equity. As and when you increase your debt component, the return on equity also will increase. It will increase up to certain point and then it start decreasing, because the reason is that, why is it increasing sharply even at this stage, is that the shareholders are very much sure that when the most of the profits earned are being paid away as interest, there is very little amount available for shareholders, correct? Since the cost of interest or cost of debt is very high, the profits whatever is earned may be just sufficient to maybe sufficient to pay those interest only, right? There'll be very minimal amount of returns that will be available for equity shareholders. But if you look at this last thing, correct, there's a slight dip. Now, it's like, since your the debt holders, correct, the debenture holders may be expecting very high amount of returns, and to compensate this effect of st- I mean to compensate this effect of having more amount of debt may have an impact on the returns expected by equity, and equity shareholders tend to expect less now, because it is already very much evident in the firm that the returns expected by debt holders is very high, since the risk taken is also very high. To compensate this, the shareholders of the firm will tend to ask lesser returns, correct? Otherwise, you cannot run the firm. So, as a conclusion, we can tell this. We can make this statement. As the firm borrows more of its business risk is shifted from shareholders to creditors. Correct? As and when the business starts increasing its debt in its capital structure, it is like having more shift of risk from the equity shareholders to debenture holders, because the interest payable will also be very high, correct? So this essentially means that at higher level of debt, the return of equity becomes less sensitive to further borrowings. They don't care, correct? They don't care. You borrow more funds, you do whatever you want. My expectation is 20%, because on a market scale, if I look at it from a market perspective, market is going somewhere around some 18 to 22%. I generally expect 20%. You borrow funds, you don't borrow funds, that is your headache. You pay your debenture holders, you don't pay your debenture holders, that is a different thing for me, correct? But you need to pay. My expectation is 20%, right? So this is about your theory. Now let's go to the last slide of this session. So these are the few criticisms of theory. First thing, firms are liable to pay taxes on their income. Additionally, investors who receive returns are subject to pay personal income tax, right? Which is not actually practical. There can be either one of them. Either the firm has to pay taxes on their income and distribute the income to the shareholders, or shareholders should take the profits from the firm and pay personal tax on their, they need to pay it from their pocket. Bankruptcy costs can be quite high. This we have studied. Agency costs exist. Initially, we studied that there is no agency cost, but there will be agency cost. That was the assumption of approach, which stated that market is perfect. It cannot be so because agency cost will be very high because there will be conflicts between managers and shareholders or managers and creditors. Managers seem to have a preference for certain sequence of finance. That is a personal bias, correct? They might tend to take more debt, or they might tend to take more equity. That is a personal bias what managers can have. Informational symmetry exists. Initially, we studied that information asymmetry is there, correct? But informational symmetry is possible because managers are well informed than investors, correct? The information flow is not clear. First it comes to the notice of managers, then only it might flow to the investors. So last is personal leverage and corporate leverage are not perfect substitutes. Me going to a bank and taking a loan of 5 lakhs is very different from a corporate taking a loan of 5 lakhs. There are different procedures, different rate of interest and different things, right? So they cannot be a perfect substitute. So these are the four approaches to capital structure. Please be very careful and read it thoroughly. You can use either Prasanna Chandra or Kanan Jain, but I want you guys to read it from the textbooks because these are very important. You can never miss the graph, or don't miss the assumptions. You need to clearly write which proposition means what. Very important topic from your exam point of time, exam point of view. So be very careful. Thank you so much.